The businesses and business owners that have access to capital are ones that bankers find familiar, meaning like not people of color or women entrepreneurs. Banks want to give loans to people that already have existing businesses. And the people that have existing businesses are by and large like white wealthy people. Even if you discount the really large difference in starting point, which is hard to discount, but even if you discount that, and you saw, for example, my mom, who was a woman of color, immigrant, applying for a loan, or you had someone who had the exact same assets, but the underwriter knew that person from their country club, which of course my mom was not a member of a country club. Even if that person had the same qualifications and same assets, that person is much more likely to get a loan.
This is the Personal Finance Show.
Hi, I'm Bo Humphreys, and this is the Personal Finance Show. Nico Barawid wants you to know that personal finance is very different for immigrants. And it's even harder if you're an immigrant who is also a woman or person of color, like Nico's mom. Nico came to the U.S. from the Philippines with his parents when he was very young. Despite the fact that they were both medical residents and eventually doctors in the U.S., Nico's parents faced a lot of financial discrimination because of their lack of credit history. And the worst part about this is that it isn't that they lack credit history entirely, it's that they didn't have credit history in the U.S. They had student loans and credit cards in the Philippines before they left. So why wouldn't that credit history count in the U.S.? Good question. It's because the credit evaluation process is broken. For as long as financial institutions have been around, no one has ever thought to connect the global credit reporting systems in a meaningful way. And all of the local systems are different, so good credit in the Philippines means nothing to U.S. banks. They just don't trust it. So when the three founders of a new company called Nova Credit were looking for their first employee, Nico jumped at the opportunity to help fix this broken system. Nico is now working with banks and credit bureaus around the world, connecting them one at a time so that one day immigrants with good credit will be able to bring that credit to the U.S. and Canada and not have to go through what his parents went through. I'm very happy that Nico is doing this and that he joined me from the San Francisco Bay Area to tell his family's personal finance story.
My earliest memory with money is very much tied to my parents' immigration story in the U.S. and my upbringing as a son of immigrants. So when I grew up, because my parents sacrificed a lot of their wealth at the time to bring myself and my siblings over to the United States, they were very, very strict with money to the point where I always grew up thinking that we were poor. And it was not until, I went to college when I realized, oh, wait, my parents are both medical professionals. Like they're fine.
Okay.
And yeah. And in particular with credit, I was always sort of brought up thinking that any sort of debt is bad. Obviously now there are nuances to that story, but like, from very early, my parents hammered in home that, credit card debt is bad, debt for personal expenses is bad. And so that was sort of what stuck with me when I graduated from college and got my first credit card. And I was like, oh no, I'm doing something bad. And so I've had to evolve a bit from that view.
That's not a bad way to start. It's better than starting from the other extreme. Yeah, exactly. So start from there and then, some credit is good. That's totally fine.
Right.
You're not going to get in much trouble. You might have missed an opportunity to spend something. That's the only risk of this upbringing.
Yeah.
That's the only downside.
Well, I think the other thing, which I'll probably modify as I, have children and have them entering adulthood is that the people I saw that had the easiest access to credit after college and in their first year were those whose parents had opened up credit cards for them when they were, in high school or college and they already had a credit history. Whereas like I faced the same issue that a lot of immigrants do going to the US and Canada, which is that like, because I was new to credit, I could only get a small secured card.
Interesting. That's a very interesting perspective because wait, you were born here or no? Sorry, I say here. I'm not even in the States.
I was born in the Philippines.
Yeah, but you came over early.
Yeah, but I grew up like in the States.
Yeah, so where you had the opportunity to build up credit, but because your parents were so debt averse, you you didn't build up credit when you had the opportunity. I didn't even think of that as the negative.
Yeah, that's right. And so I had to build it up from scratch when I was a professional that like wanted to buy a couch and could only do so with cash instead of with a credit card.
Wow. Yeah, that's crazy. So you got like that's it's good education from your parents. Like that, there's nothing wrong with what they did, but what they missed was the opportunity to help you integrate with the credit system.
That's right. And when I say that, there was nuances to my parents' point, I totally agree with you that like generally I think if you're going to err on one side, it's much better to err on the side of debt being bad. But, as you and your listeners all know, having a good credit history, like having a credit card that you pay on time is better than having no credit card in many ways. And so that's the nuance that I had to learn entering into the world as my own.
Yeah. Okay, so let's talk about, so your parents were medical professionals. What did they do?
Yeah, they were both educated in medical school in the Philippines and then came over here to sort of do their residency equivalent in the US.
Oh, so they're both doctors.
Yeah, that's right.
So you had doctors as parents, and you thought that like you were poor pretty much.
Yeah, because so I think a few things. One is that my siblings and I, from growing up, were all in pretty good private schools. And so tens of thousands of dollars of my parents' income went to their children's education, which was obviously a huge sacrifice for them.
Sure.
But because from their perspective, if they had calculated that in pesos, regardless of however much they earned in US dollars, they could not imagine their parents spending that much in Philippine pesos. And so they always thought that they were poor and could never afford anything. But I don't think that was totally true. But it very much made its impression on me where, I am not at all a profligate spender.
Okay, I see. So that the schooling was so expensive that they felt poor.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, I'm sure a lot of parents today would agree the sacrifices made to put their kids in private school. It's very expensive.
Yeah, totally. And because we went to private school since we were very young, as they were growing their income, they always had that fixed expense, regardless of how much they earned.
Okay, so what was the credit experience for them then coming across? So they had to pay for everything with cash, whether they want to or not, right? Yeah,
that's right. Because despite having good credit history in the Philippines, my parents both had credit cards and student loans and stuff that they paid on time in the Philippines. When they moved to the US, they needed to get a car and they needed to buy furniture and all the stuff that immigrants need to get is expensive when they first move to a country. And so when my parents tried to get a credit card, they had to get, like me, when I first went into the working world, they could only get a $500 secured credit card, which of course was not enough money to pay for household expenses. And they couldn't get an auto loan for their car, which was problematic because they needed the car to go to residency. And so those struggles that they faced really, really stuck with me and really influenced sort of what I've been deciding to do with my life.
Yeah. And, on top of that, just so if people don't know what a secured card is, of course, you have to give them exactly the amount of money that the credit limit is. And they probably put it in some kind of safe investment for you, hopefully. And then if ever you decide to cancel that card, then you get the money back. And it's really just for convenience purposes only to be able to use a credit card in a situation where, like you say, renting a car or a hotel where you need one.
Yeah, that's right. And in fact, the secured card that I think is a starter card for a lot of people after college and for a lot of immigrants is kind of a silly concept where you pay $500 into some account that you can't touch. And then you get a credit card with a $500 limit, right? So, you don't, you're not actually leveraging yourself in any way. You're saying,
yeah,
you can have $500 and I will spend $500. But what it really does is it allows you to build a credit history, which is much more important than using that $500 in cash.
Yeah, I think people discount not a lot of people, but there's some people that I've known who just prefer to live on cash, and society does not favor them.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, if you live on cash, then you have to buy your house in cash, which in a city like Toronto or San Francisco is several $100,000, if not millions of dollars.
So your parents, they eventually then had to buy a house. Did they then wait until they had decent credit, or were there limitations there for them?
Yeah, that's right. I remember all of us back then, a family of five, all living in a small apartment for two reasons. One is that one-way credit is used is with landlords. And so when my parents as tenants showed their landlord, basically they didn't have any credit history. The landlord was like, okay, pay like 9 months of deposit, which was again, another
Whoa.
enormous cash outlay for immigrants.
So not even a mortgage problem yet. We're just having a rental deposit problem.
That's right. And
Wow.
so, one of the reasons why we had to be in such a small apartment was because larger apartments would require larger deposits. And so, I remember all of us cramming into a small apartment from the beginning. The other reason why we had to be in such a small apartment was the fact that, of course, they couldn't get a mortgage without having credit history. And so they had to build that up before we could actually buy a house in the US.
Yeah. Do you remember how long that was? Or did they buy a house?
I want to say it was 4 years. So they had to save up for a down payment. But even after that, after they saved up for the down payment, they still needed to have a really good credit history because, as
yeah.
and as your listeners might know, a mortgage usually is 15 to 30 years. And if you have a bad interest rate, then that follows you for 30 years.
Man. So yeah, you have to save the money. So they're working their tails off. I mean, I guess they'd be in residency for a little bit before they got real doctor money. And
right.
So it probably took a while, but and there were, you said five, so three kids?
Yeah, that's right.
So yeah, are you the youngest?
I'm the oldest.
You're the oldest. Okay. So you don't seem that old at all. So how, is everybody, in their 20s now or?
Yeah, that's right. So my youngest sibling from then, my parents had another sibling when I was in high school, but my youngest sibling from then just graduated from college a couple of years ago. And so now it's funny actually, because now that we're all adults, we're all realizing how stingy we've all become as a result of our very immigrant parents' upbringing.
Again, not a bad problem, something
right.
you can definitely work with as opposed to the opposite.
Right.
So let's talk a little bit more about you before we get into the business, which is all still very relevant to this story. So you went to school then. Did you work at all? Did you work while you were growing up?
I did not work growing up. My parents, again, being the immigrants that they were, I actually asked them if I could work, and they were like, no, you have to focus on school and get straight A's.
So they made sure you went to private school and focused on that because they were paying a lot for it.
That's right. They were like, we're not going to pay for you to go to private school and then you to flunk out.
Yeah, good point.
So I did start working in college to help defray the costs of tuition for my parents.
Mm-hmm.
And I had, odd jobs here and there and like libraries and laboratories. And then I went to graduate school. And then my first job was as a management consultant after graduate school.
What did you take in school?
I studied economics and then public policy.
Nice. And the combination of those, what did it prepare you for? What was there a specific job at the end of this tunnel?
Yeah, I think for me, as a good immigrant son, I actually went to college thinking I was going to be a doctor,
Okay.
And then realized that I didn't want to, obviously no offense to doctors, but I didn't want to spend my college career in a laboratory and found people really interesting. And so I studied economics because I found the social sciences and the study of people's behaviors in mathematical form really, really interesting.
Yeah.
And then I went on to policy, graduate school for the same reason, which was that I really wanted to, improve people's lives in the world with that knowledge. And so ultimately, I knew that I wanted to have a career that spanned both the public and private sector.
Mm-hmm.
Up until now, I've just been in the private sector, but I'm looking forward to going back into government and affecting sort of that public policy change that I went to school for.
Oh, nice. So that's your long-term plan then is to get into politics of some kind?
Yeah, I think government or policy would be really interesting.
Yeah, that's cool. Okay, so you're set up and you said you had a consulting job when you got out?
That's right. I worked after college as a management consultant and worked there for a couple of years before I decided I wanted to. So my passion in college had always been climate change and renewable energy. And so I left the consulting job to go to a solar energy company where I was financing solar assets.
Okay, changing the world. So what year was this?
This was in 2014.
2014. So
yep.
How long did you stay in the solar company?
I stayed there for 2 years. It went bankrupt, which also taught me a lot about personal finance.
Wow. Okay. So it was a bit of a startup.
It actually wasn't. So when I went, it was the largest solar energy company in the world.
Fascinating. Okay.
Yeah. And what happened was that it was called Sun Edison. Sun Edison had ambitions to grow really quickly, and was rewarded by Wall Street for their ambition of growth. But the way they grew quickly was through a lot of debt-fueled acquisitions.
Okay.
And obviously when sort of the bells stopped ringing and everyone stopped celebrating Sun Edison, what was left was a company full of debt, and ultimately they couldn't service their debt obligations, and so went bankrupt as a result of growing too quickly via debt.
Oh wow, so I guess that's a lesson for all of us.
Right, exactly.
Don't like. I guess how could they have done it differently? Just as a case study here, like they would have done it in a longer period and not just.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think more measured growth,
as opposed to
would have
growing
been
really
more prudent,
fast.
and in particular, yeah, they were. So like I was there for a year and a half, and while I was there, I think the market cap like doubled or tripled in the same time as a result of ongoing acquisitions. And then, but if they had decided to acquire companies more prudently, meaning acquire companies when they actually had the cash to do so rather than having to raise the debt, then it would have made it much less risky.
Now, so let's focus back on you then. Were you making your first money then of your own doing this?
I was making my first money in consulting.
Yeah. How long was that, by the way? How long did you do that?
That was for a couple of years. The thing about consulting was, I think when people right after college go to consulting, they both earn money, but then have a lot of expenses that they can charge back to the company. And so for me, like those expenses and in terms of flights and hotels were much larger than the money I was making. And so it was actually very difficult for me to see how much money I had in my bank account at any point, because, I would have like $5,000 in my bank and then like $15,000 in expenses. And I would never know, like once I file all my expenses and get my reimbursements, like how much money do I actually have? And that was like, if I could go back and do it again, like that's something that I would keep closer track of.
Yeah. It's all flowing in and out. So yeah, maybe keep that separately or use a separate card or account for that. Yeah. So you could see. So I suppose at this time, then you're not investing any money or do you know about investing or anything, or do you know about what to do? Or your parents taught you how to be frugal?
Yeah, no, they did not teach me about investments. And so it wasn't until I worked at the solar energy company that I knew, like, and when I didn't have such large fluctuations in cash, that I was like, oh, like, what should I do with my extra cash? Like, it's probably not good to hold it in cash. And so it wasn't until my second job that I did that. Yeah.
So you're working at solar, you're making decent money. And so now you're able to maybe put some of it away?
That's right. So I was always, one of the things that I knew was like always, I mean, this is more for the US than in Canada, but I was like always contribute to my 401k at least to where the company matches.
Yeah, we have a similar story here. Yeah.
Yeah, like free money.
Exactly.
So I always did that. So I always had money in my 401ks, and then extra cash I would just put towards, the robo advisors like Betterment and Wealthfront. Yeah.
So you're young enough that was around when you were learning about all of this.
Right.
So yeah, so you got that taken care of. So robos, you just made it easy for yourself, and now you're able to focus on the other things that you want to do, maybe in the financial space. Is it soon after that you start having this idea of going out on your own, or how long did that take?
Yeah. So I went from the solar energy company to another company, actually, which was a really, really interesting company. So it was a bank, a social impact bank called Beneficial State Bank, here in Oakland, California. And it was founded by a couple of philanthropists that had the idea that the banking sector should be not extractive, meaning that like when you deposit money in a bank, obviously the bank goes around and makes loans with that money.
Yeah.
And sometimes what happens is you deposit money in a bank, and then the bank like makes loans to oil companies or to like cigarette companies. And so what the bank's innovation was, to the extent that you care what your deposits are doing, you should care like what the loans are that the bank are making. And so we, as a bank that cares about social impact, are going to make loans to renewable energy, which was why I was interested in it, but also like nonprofits, women and minority owned businesses, businesses, et cetera. And so I worked there for almost a year, learning about the banking world and how finance can really intersect with social good.
Yeah, I love this. This is great. So this is, how many of these are in the States? Is it a unique thing?
There are a few. They have a name called CDFI, which is Community Development Financial Institution or something like that.
Okay.
And what they do is they are banks that want to use their lending portfolio to actually do good in the world. And so they say, you should deposit your money with us because we're gonna actually try to improve the world.
And what was the name of it again?
Beneficial State Bank.
Great. And so can people from anywhere in the States sign up for this bank?
Yeah, totally. So this bank accepts deposits from everywhere, but they only have branches on the West Coast. So in California, Oregon, and Washington. So likely it's not going to be helpful if a New Yorker tries to open an account with this bank because there's no branches in New York. But you can find CDFIs that are anywhere in the US and one that will likely have a branch close to you.
That's great. And I'm wondering if we have anything like that in Canada, but I think it's a fantastic thing. So yeah, what would you say did your mind sort of expand as to what can be done in the financial space?
Yeah, totally. I mean, I think even up until this job, I still was under the impression that debt is pretty bad,
Okay. Yeah.
But what this bank showed me was that, there are some really interesting entrepreneurs and causes that just cannot expand because they can't get the capital to expand. And it's only a very small fraction of companies that can raise, VC, venture capital money.
Yeah.
All other types of companies have to get bank loans. And so when I realized that shortage of capital need, I realized actually that the good that loans can do in the world.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I'm really debt averse, and I don't recommend consumer debt to individuals. But I actually have a completely separate opinion about borrowing or lending to companies for growth. I think that it's the only way. It's the only way to grow. Of course, not in an accelerated way like your solar company did. Let's put the qualifier there.
Right.
But within reason, right? I mean, especially, maybe you got to build up a little bit, but if you want to get to the next level, sometimes you need an influx of capital, and it's not always going to be able to come from, a rich family member, or you happen to know a VC or be in the right business to get venture capitalists or angel investors. Yeah,
that's right. And I think, unfortunately, the businesses and business owners that have access to capital are ones that bankers find familiar, meaning not people of color or women entrepreneurs. And so what we found was that there is a dearth of entrepreneurs from these communities. And so what we tried to do was give them access to responsible capital so that they could go and employ a ton of people and show others that women and minorities can be great business owners. And so that was the gap that we were trying to fill in some ways.
That's a really good point to make. And I don't know if everybody even realizes that. Did you have direct experience with any? Do you have any examples from when you were working at the bank where you saw this, or the stories from the banking industry? Yeah,
I mean there were a lot of folks in the local community that tried to go to, they had nonprofits or they had small businesses and they tried to go to other typical sources of capital. Mm-hmm. And they couldn't. I mean, a good example is my parents. So my mom started a clinic for those in car accidents because she saw that those people, it was often expensive for them to get adequate medical care. And she actually did try to get a small business loan in the US and was repeatedly rejected. And so she actually had to grow her business without any access to bank loans.
And this is a doctor.
Yeah.
It just happens to be a woman and an immigrant.
Yeah.
But, I mean, I don't see, on paper, how would she look any different than anybody else, right?
Yeah, that's exactly right. And I think, I hesitate to say the the bankers that were looking at her file were, racist or sexist, but I think that there are systematic biases that make it harder for generally women and minority business owners to grow their business as fast as everyone else.
And it's also possible that they were actually racist as well, the people. But we can't prove that. But yes, no, you're right. It could be a combination of all of that, which then makes it even worse, right? If the people just happen to be racist. And do you have any more info about why that is? Is it just the system was built up that way and it's still like that, and there's no clear reason? Like somebody looks at a piece of paper and it says, a Filipino woman, even though she's an MD, somehow they just think more risk.
Yeah, I think it's that. I think that they see more risk. I think one part is that the root causes go back a lot, but one of them is that it's hard for people to start their first business. So banks want to give loans to people that already have existing businesses, and the people that have existing businesses are by and large white wealthy people.
Of course. Yeah.
And so the effects just compound, where what you see is a widening gap in wealth outcomes between the white landed class and everyone else.
Yeah. So this is the wealth gap, right?
Right. And
the gender gap and the wealth gap are the big things that hopefully are getting smaller these days, because it's top of mind, I think, in conversation for most people. But it would take somebody said something like it'd take 200 years to close the wealth gap because of the runway that the white people had from hundreds of years ago, right?
Yeah, and I think also even if you discount the really large difference in starting point, which is hard to discount, but even if you discount that, and you saw, for example, my mom, who was a woman of color, immigrant, applying for a loan, or you had someone who had the exact same assets, but the underwriter knew that person from their country club, which of course my mom was not a member of a country club. Even if that person had the same qualifications and same assets, that person is much more likely to get a loan. And so I think that there is some truth to what you just said, which is you look at someone who has a funny name and who may or may not have assets, and for some subconscious reason, you likely think that they are higher risk when it comes to paying back the loan.
Do you think that AI and other things like this will help take away these human biases?
I think there can be two outcomes. One is that, it would be amazing for AI to take away these human biases because they are blind to the name of the person or to the immigration status. But I think the opposite can be true as well, which is that the quality of the outputs in an AI model are only as good as the quality of the inputs. And to the extent that the quality of the inputs is sexist or racist because they only have training data from sexist or racist underwriting outcomes, then AI is not going to change that.
That's terrible.
And so, there are a lot of fintech companies in San Francisco that are using AI underwriting models, but that are actually having discriminatory outcomes because of this issue. And so the regulators are very careful to note not just what the model is, the model itself, the variables, the mechanics of it might not be racist. It's very obviously not racist, but then what's important is the outputs of that model.
I never thought that we could have racist and sexist robots. This is this is the worst. But what you're saying makes so much sense. It's only as good as the quality of the programming.
Yeah, and it's if, for example, you had 100 Google searches that all where everyone searched because people are generally have some subconscious bias, women, and the next search term is housewife, right? So Google sees all of the data coming in as women housewife. Even if Google's equations are not racist, what could come out is a racist outcome, a sexist outcome, because they only had sexist inputs. And so I think that's the danger with AI and machine learning.
Wow, yeah, because they learn from the society at large right now.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. Well, okay, so we still have a long way to go there. I'm sure we could keep trying to theorize, and maybe hopefully you will be one of the ones to help fix this broken system. But you obviously you were wide awake then after being in this banking, social impact banking environment. And where did you go next?
Next, I went to the startup that I'm currently at. So I was the first business employee at the startup called Nova Credit.
Yes.
And I was attracted to this company because of exactly the issues that we've been talking about, which is that like personal finance and like immigration and growing up as a sort of person of color, like very much intersect and made personal finance top of mind for me. And in particular, as I mentioned, like immigrants cannot bring in their credit history, no matter how good it is, from abroad into the US and Canada.
Yeah. Well, and let's also qualify that too. Canadians can't bring into the US, right?
That's right.
Like I'm an immigrant to the U.S. if I were to come over.
There are some asterisks there, which is like if you are a customer of TD in Canada, TD could be able to use your data in the U.S.
Okay, so there's some exceptions.
American Express, but it's only like very narrow cases where you have to use the same bank and you have to like hope. For example, like Scotiabank doesn't have a U.S. like presence, and so you can't use your Scotiabank account in the U.S. Yeah. And so it's a very like sort of patchwork set of solutions.
Yeah, but I mean we're not the ones that need the most help in this regard, I'm sure. It's probably worse for countries that aren't in North America.
Yeah, but I mean, ultimately, as you mentioned, the problem is fundamentally the same. And so, it's that's actually a good example where like the credit bureaus in Canada are exactly the credit bureaus in the US.
They have the same names. They're the same.
The financial institutions in Canada, like several of them have presence in the US, and still Canadians face this issue, which shows like how ridiculous it is.
Yeah. So this is so Nova Credit. You and who was there before you started?
The three founders. So Misha Esipov, who is a son of Russian immigrants.
Okay.
Nikki Goulimis, who is a son of is the daughter of Greek immigrants to the UK, and who lived in the UK before going to graduate school in the US. And then Luke Jensen, who is a Dutch immigrant to the US and went to the US for graduate school.
Yes, this is all close to home for everybody.
That's right.
Yeah, that's great. And so, I mean, that's funny. I'm sure that you're not allowed to hire based on this, or maybe you are. But is that what is happening? Like, I mean, who better to be in this company? Everybody should have something close to being an immigrant, right?
Right. We hire for passion, and of course, the most passion are thinly veiled.
We won't get into HR stuff, but yeah, no, I mean, right. That would be great. This is the situation where I'd be like, screw HR rules. You should be able to hire who would be the best, right?
Right. So we hire for people that care the most about the cause, and what we found is obviously that has over-indexed on people
of course,
who have either directly experienced this or like have, like myself, like close family members that have.
Exactly. So you're the first employee, and maybe you could say what was the company about then? Isn't it the same now? Is it the same mandate?
Yeah, exactly. Then I think we were a little bit more naive about building this business. I think back then we thought like, oh, we can just build this business, but now we realize why it hasn't been built yet, because it's been very, very difficult. But that gives us even greater sort of determination to solve the problem.
Yeah, you're pioneers. So let's give a brief explanation as to what you're doing at Nova.
Yeah. So generally what Nova does is we help immigrants bring in their credit history from overseas into the US and Canada. So we partner with, on one hand, bureaus and other sort of information sources in countries overseas. And then on the other hand, we partner with banks and property managers and anyone that uses credit to offer a product to convince them that the bureau data that we offer from overseas is the same quality and structure as the data that they get in the US and Canada. So what I do is I lead our Canadian business. And so you and I met in Toronto at the Empire FinTech event.
We did.
And I was there because I am bringing this technology to the banks in Canada.
That's awesome. And there's only a handful.
That's right.
As opposed to the States, right?
Right.
Of course, this business exists because nobody talks to each other around the world. Banks, credit, it's all just silos everywhere.
That's right. And what's particularly crazy is that several of the banks that we talk to in the US and Canada and globally have international subsidiaries. So, for example, they might have a subsidiary in Mexico or India where they get the same data that we get. It's just that they don't have any way to quickly transfer that data into the US. And so what we found is situations where we'll talk to one subsidiary of a bank to get the data into that country, and then another subsidiary of the bank to get the same data into another country, even though they have the data themselves.
Man, who's building these companies is so disconnected all over the place, eh?
Yeah, that's right.
What year was this then you joined then?
Last year. So 2017 at the beginning of the last year.
So beginning of 2017. So we're nearing the end of 2018. That seems crazy, right?
Yeah.
So that would be almost 2 years then for you?
That's right. And the company was founded like 2 months before I joined, 2 or 3 months before I joined.
Yeah. So can you talk a little bit about the progress that you've been making with this and challenges or not?
Yeah, totally. So we see our business on two sides, the two that I mentioned. On one side, we call it the supply of data. And then on the other side, we call it the demand for that data. So on the supply of data, what we do is we go to the leading bureaus in countries overseas and say, we'd like to work with you to bring your data into the US and Canada and hopefully in the future globally. And so we have a team that leads those discussions with the bureaus. That is a difficult set of discussions because the bureaus are obviously very careful about the data that they have overseas, especially in light of recent, cyber attacks and breaches.
Absolutely.
And so we work with those bureaus to make sure to convince them of the social opportunity, first of all, and then the commercial opportunity. And then finally, of the fact that we as a company, even though we're young, have our ducks in a row when it comes to our cybersecurity. Some of the difficulty is that first set of partnerships, which is the supply side of the equation. And then on the demand side of the equation, which is the side of the business that I work on, we, as I mentioned, convince the banks to buy the data. So we work across 3 verticals. The first is property management. So as I mentioned, my mom had to pay 9 months of deposit. Right now, what we're trying to do is convince landlords that, look, this person might not have US or Canadian credit history, but they have credit history overseas. So there's no reason that you need to charge them 9 months. You can charge them the same as you charge everyone, which is 1 month. The second vertical that we work in is financial institutions in the US. So US banks that want to issue credit cards to immigrants, but currently cannot. And then the third vertical is the one that I lead, which is our Canadian and ultimately international vertical, where previously we could only send data from India to the US. And now what we want to be able to do is send data from India to Canada or India to UK or Singapore or anywhere.
I just want to step back to the rent situation for a sec, because I remember I was going to ask you about this before. So the landlord needed 9 months a rent deposit because they didn't have good credit. But then once they pay the landlord for many years, that record of payment does not go into any report, correct? Is there no credit report for rent?
Yeah, that's right. There are some companies hoping to solve this problem by creating, instead of a creditworthiness assessment, a rentworthiness assessment. And some companies are trying to report it to the bureaus, but it's not systematic in the sense that not everyone that pays rent has that data reported back to the bureaus.
Yeah, I know Dwello is doing that. I had Chris Chan was on my first episode of the podcast.
Oh, awesome.
And I was just wondering if that is part of your mandate as well. Are you thinking on the way of changing the way credit is looked at?
Right now, we are focused on bringing data from overseas to the US and Canada.
Sure.
But ultimately, what we do want to do is basically get data from anywhere.
Yeah.
That helps to prove that someone can pay something on time and any type of data and bring it to anywhere. And so ultimately, different data sources from, for example, if you paid your rent on time in the Philippines every month, like we would love to be able to use that to convince a credit card company that you're going to pay your credit card payment on time every month. So something like that for sure is on the horizon.
Because doesn't it mean the same thing? Like I know the credit agencies were basically created by the banks. Am I wrong?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. So that they decided what metrics were important to them. But from your perspective and your analysis lately, like is paying rent on time versus paying your credit card or your debts on time, are they the same?
We haven't done the analysis, but anecdotally, people
please.
That pay their rent on time every month are very responsible, and so we'd love to prove that out with data.
I'm all about anecdotes, so please. But I know you have to say that so that you're not quoting the company information or anything. But yeah, no, feel free to share those because I'm interested in your opinion based on your experience as well as the data that you've collected.
Yeah, I mean, what we found, especially among low-income individuals and families, is that part of the reason that they stay low income is because despite the fact that they have really good record of paying, for example, their utility bills on time or their rent payments on time, that doesn't get reported. And so they keep having to get high interest loans, and that high interest loans means that they can't build their wealth, right? If we could find a way to report the regular payments that everyone's doing, but don't get reported to the bureaus and use that for getting lower cost loans, like that is the holy grail.
Yeah, that sounds amazing. Anything that keeps people off the payday loans is a good thing for me.
Right.
So I guess I got a couple of questions. Why India, first of all? Why would you start with them?
When we were first starting the business, we did the analysis to show which countries are supplying the most immigrants to the U.S. And now we include Canadian immigration flows in that analysis.
Sure.
And which immigrants are most likely to have credit history abroad, meaning like which ones were the most credit active in their home countries. And what we found was when you look at visa categories for people that are coming to the US and Canada for jobs or coming to the US and Canada on skilled visas, they tend to come from a handful of countries that comprise like 50% of the population. Among those is India, China, Mexico, the UK, South Korea for student visas, and Brazil for student visas. And so we really went after those countries and the credit bureaus in those countries to make sure that we could have the maximum impact in the shortest amount of time.
Sure, that makes a lot of sense. So obviously India is at the top of that list. And so can you tell us a little bit about the experience with the dealing with, so you've already done this between India and the US then? That's
right. So the integrations that we have live or are currently working on are India, Mexico, the UK, Australia, Nigeria, Brazil, South Korea. So we have integrations across all of the continents. Nice. And can currently serve almost 50% of the immigrants in the US and Canada.
And this is all behind the scenes. It's not like somebody needs to sign up for this, right?
That's right. So we right now work directly with the banks that would be the ones issuing the credit cards, for example, to the applicants. And when the applicants apply for a credit card or when they are applying for an apartment lease, the bank or the landlord would say, oh, we have a partnership with Nova Credit. We can bring in your credit history overseas. And then the person says, oh, great, I have credit history in Brazil. And then they go through the process to bring in that credit history into the US and Canada.
Okay, so they do have to sign off and pull the trigger on this. But like, should they go to a different bank if somebody doesn't ask this question?
Yeah, I mean, we are in as you know, we're a pretty young company, so we're in the process of working with all of the banks.
Yeah, no, I imagine you will, but you're not there yet.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah, but we're not there yet. That's right.
Yeah, so like, is there a list on your website or something like that about like you go to this bank?
We have a list of lenders that we work with.
Yeah.
On our website, but not all of the ones that we work with are disclosed yet because we're in the sort of pilot stages with a lot of the customers.
Sure, yeah. So like if somebody just came in to the States and they're in this situation that your parents were in, is there a step-by-step process they can go through, or is it just still in infancy and we'll get there?
Right now it's still in infancy because we're trying to figure out the sorts of banks and property managers that are excited to work with us.
Yeah.
But ultimately we are planning on establishing some sort of like website or information portal that can help immigrants like go through that process.
That would be so great. And of course, if eventually, like you said, you'll be in everybody's head,
right,
in terms of the banks, then it'll just become part of the infrastructure. Is that kind of the golden target for everybody?
Yeah, that's right. And I mean, what we tell the banks, which is true, is that this is an enormous segment that's currently not being served. So
Absolutely.
To put some numbers around that, in the US, there are 47 million immigrants, and in Canada, there are 10 million immigrants that are likely to have credit history abroad. And in Canada, it's like 20% of the population.
Yeah, that's a much higher percentage of Canada than in the States.
That's right. And so imagine like across the US and Canada, that's almost 60 million people that are not being served by the financial sector or by landlords or whatever. And so in addition to having a big social impact, that's also a big commercial opportunity. And so that's our pitch.
Yeah, it's not because they don't have money or the ability to pay debts as they become due or to pay things on time. It's because of a system that is old.
Yep, that's right.
Do you guys get frustrated like on a daily basis about that?
I think the best tool in an entrepreneur's arsenal is hope and optimism.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so you know this well from starting up your own sort of stuff from scratch, but
yes.
It's easy to get frustrated. It's harder to stay optimistic.
It is, especially if anybody tells you that this particular process is easy or no problem, or this is how I did it. I mean, you guys, you really don't even have a model for this because this is all brand new stuff.
Yeah, we are effectively creating infrastructure from scratch. Our ultimate end goal is creating what we call the credit passport. So in the same way that, you can use your passport to bring your non-financial identity to any country around the world, we want to create a credit passport so that you can bring your financial identity anywhere around the world. And when we get there, then that's when we'll be satisfied.
I love it. And probably distant future, it'll all be just integrated into one global identity, right?
Yeah, that's right.
Which would be awesome. Like the fragmentation of everything. I mean, I guess that's your daily life is experiencing that.
Yeah, I mean, it's really difficult to have bits and pieces of your core identity reside in multiple databases in multiple places. And I think the holy grail is like not just a combined identity, but a combined identity that the consumer controls. And that's sort of where we're headed.
I guess the last thing that I would want to ask is, like, why hasn't anyone done this before? And why wouldn't a bank or a landlord want to do this? What are the negatives for them?
Yeah, that's a great question. The reason why it hasn't been done before is because it's really, really freaking hard to do it.
Yeah, I think we probably all figure that out by now, but I just wanted to see if there was any other reason.
What it requires is an ease of operating across multiple different geographies, across multiple different data formats, in multiple different regulatory regimes. And it's both a business problem, meaning that we have to convince people to work with us, in addition to a technical problem, meaning that we have to standardize all of the different data formats around the world. And so what it requires is a team like ours that has a very strong social impact reason to solve this.
Yeah, good point.
And the reason why like the credit bureaus themselves haven't done it is because the credit bureaus like TransUnion and Equifax have global subsidiaries, but they do not have subsidiaries in every single country. And so even if they were to combine the data from all of their subsidiaries, they would only be able to offer a partially global solution. Whereas what we do is we're a third party that sits in between all of the bureaus and can work therefore with any of them. And so that's why they haven't done it yet.
Yeah. And then why wouldn't anyone jump on the ship with you guys?
I don't know.
I mean, that's what I'm thinking.
I think really the key reason is that banks, not because they're bad or evil, but banks are just slow moving creatures. And, each one has tens and hundreds of thousands of employees. And so making any big decision or change to how they do their core business today just takes a long time. And so we have to talk to a million different people at a bank before we can convince them to do it. The other piece is that what we need to do often is convince banks that, the Indian data is as good or as useful as Canadian data or US data. And after they get across that intellectual hurdle, then usually they're on board with the size of the opportunity.
Are we coming back to the cultural biases here again too? Is that like, data is not as good as ours? Yeah,
I think that maybe plays a role in it. And in fact, what we found is the banks where we've had the fastest conversations or the ones that are most excited to work with us are the ones that have, chief risks officers or, underwriters that themselves are immigrants. And they say, okay, yeah, we don't need to be convinced any further.
Yeah, that's great.
So, yeah, it's been an interesting finding.
That'll probably become easier and easier as hopefully as more immigrants and people of color and women are rising to the top of these organizations, and it's not just old white guys, right?
Yeah, I think that's right. I think it's like familiarity and sort of empathy is key here.
Yeah. Do you feel like, I mean, do we need a generational shift to move forward with a lot of these things, or are there some allies in the existing generation that will help kind of move this forward?
Yeah, I mean, I hesitate to say that all we need to do is have like all the old cranky people die off, but
that is what I kind of just said. Yeah.
But ultimately, like, yeah, we have found really powerful allies in a lot of the banks, and we've been very heartened, especially in Canada, about the attention around our product and what they see as the business imperative to serve such a large and growing population. But ultimately, it is people being able to advocate for the rights and the benefit of others unlike them that's been really helpful.
Yeah, that's pretty amazing. You guys have a really great thing going on here, and I'm really glad you're able to come on the show and talk about your story and talk about where, like, how you're going to be making a difference, and yeah, maybe next president or something, right?
We'll see. I'm happy with Trudeau. Maybe not so happy with the other one.
Yeah, I hear you. Right. Let's try to make some change across the board. But I feel like what you're doing now, I just, like, a lot of people are doing things like this in the different areas that they're in, and I've had a good handful of them on the show because I love disruption and I love progress and change, and also shaking up existing systems that are based on really old and likely racist and sexist ideology. So this is really good stuff.
Thank you. Yeah, and I think ultimately, like, the way innovation happens is by asking the hard questions, like we've done, of why is it like this? Ultimately, like, if you've been in an industry for 25, 35 years, you forget to ask, why is it like this? And I think what's really exciting is that we just have a new crop of people that are, both because of their naivete, but also because of their optimism, are asking, like, how can we change this? This seems dumb. And so that's what I'm most excited about.
Yeah, I think it's always a valid question, and it doesn't mean that things always need to change all the time. But if you ask it frequently, then sometimes the answer will be, I don't know why we should probably change this. We just didn't think about it until you said something. And so let's keep talking. Let's keep talking about it, right?
For sure.
All right. Thanks so much, Nico. Hopefully I'll see you again in the Ontario and Toronto area. But
thank you so much.
Yeah. Otherwise, have a good rest of your day.
Thank you. You as well. And thank you again for having me on the show.
If you like this episode, please subscribe to the podcast on Apple Podcasts or however you get your podcasts. And while you're there, leave me a 5-star rating or review, or both. If you're already a subscriber, you're awesome. Please join my Facebook group so that I can thank you personally and get to know my subscribers. To find the group, go to Facebook and search for The Personal Finance Show. Thanks for listening to this episode of The Personal Finance Show. I'll be back next week with personal finance expert Rubina Ahmed Haq.